I now call the member for Riverina.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. Driving around my Riverina electorate, the third largest by size in New South Wales and 14th biggest in Australia, has given me plenty of thinking time in recent months. This is because the mobile telephone coverage is not what it ought to be and certainly not what it even once was. I was once able to name all Riverina's mobile coverage black spots, and they included but were not limited to Maroolbale north of Mara, Tooma near Tumbarumba, pockets around Gundagai, Barambula, Grongrong, Humula, Sebastopol, Talimba and Tarcutta. Happily, a new tower has been erected at Mangapla, which was one of the problem districts, and this will be officially opened on Wednesday the 6th of June. Unfortunately, in recent months, Riverina mobile coverage elsewhere has deteriorated to the extent that you get just a few kilometres away from a built-up area and you lose reception. Because of the drastic loss of coverage, instead of being able to use my hands-free phone whilst driving, I have to wait until I'm in a town to retrieve messages and return calls. This is a great inconvenience. I say this because at the same time this government is pumping $37 billion of borrowed money into a broadband network we cannot afford, mobile services across regional Australia are going from bad to worse. And while it is merely an inconvenience for me, for many others it is a safety issue, and that is deeply concerning. Many of the calls of complaint to my office lately have suggested that country mobile services are being downgraded as a part of a strategy for people to get on board the new technology rollout, which might be all right for those fortunate enough to be in the designated areas for the first phase, and tough luck for those who are not. Telstra officials have admitted to me that the mobile coverage in the Riverina is not as good as it ought to be, and the corporation's commitment to my region has not, I feel, been strengthened by the fact the General Manager for Riverina Murray, based in Albury, Wodonga, has been replaced by someone looking after a far bigger area working out of Canberra. This has everything to do with the Appropriation Bill No. 1, 2012-13 and related bills before the House, because huge money is going into ripping out the copper wire network, which has served us well, to be replaced by optical fibre when wireless technology would have done the job, and funding could have, and I would argue should have been given to installing telecommunications towers to serve regional and remote communities. The government has resorted to accounting tricks and money shuffles to manufacture the appearance of a wafer-thin budget surplus of $1.5 billion in 2012-13. But the appearance of a surplus is really just an illusion. Whilst the Treasurer and Prime Minister can stand and tell us that Budget 2012 was a tough budget, the reality is Labor is spending money at an unprecedented rate, and its economic malaise is hurting Australia, particularly regional Australia. It is hurting families and hurting Australian workers, and will continue to do so for generations to come. Indeed, it would take Labor 96 years to pay off $144 billion of net debt based on the Treasurer's tiny surplus announced in his 8th of May budget. Budget 2012 delivered Australia the world's biggest carbon tax, a record debt ceiling of $300 billion, a record net debt of $145 billion, higher unemployment and Labor's fourth massive deficit in 4 years. Labor inherited $70 billion of Commonwealth assets and a $20 billion surplus from sound fiscal management by the coalition, and yet has produced the 4 biggest deficits in Australia's history. In the past 4 years, Labor has delivered cumulative record deficits of $174 billion, and interest payments on Labor's debt alone are set to reach $8 billion per year by 2015-16, and that equates to $22 million a day on interest payments. As a fuel outlet proprietor from Narrandera said to me only yesterday, our great-grandchildren will still have to pay off Labor's waste. The blowout in this year's deficit from $23 billion to $44 billion means more borrowing and more debt which future generations will have to pay. All of this in spite that in real terms the government is experiencing the fastest growth in revenue since the 1980s. 5 days before the last election, the Prime Minister promised that there would be no carbon tax under the government she led. Therefore, it is not surprising that this tax is not wanted by the Australian public. There was no need for the government to have wasted $1 million commissioning a report to be told this. It would have known it from the start if it was actually listening to the Australian people. But Labor has not listened to the people, instead taking its cues from the Greens. The result is the people stopped listening to Labor a long time ago. An election cannot come soon enough. This carbon tax is going to send energy bills soaring. The Independent Pricing and Regulatory Tribunal, hearing into the draft increase of 16%, were told that the prices needed to go higher, with Australian Power and Gas wanting prices to increase by 25%. Energy prices need to increase prices to cover infrastructure upgrades, and the additional cost of the carbon tax is making things worse. It is natural that a company passes on its cost to the consumer, but in this case, It is the government imposing the cost unnecessarily on the Australian public in the first place. Wagga Wagga City Council, or moreover the hard-working residents and families and ratepayers of that fine city, has been declared among 9 councils on Labor's hit list of 248 so-called biggest polluters. How a regional council based in a city of 63,000 people, good people, can be considered a dirty polluter is beyond belief. How residents will be slugged with annual carbon tax bills of $660,000 plus, and that's the amount in the first year, and it will only increase, just for taking their rubbish to the Gregadoo Waste Management Centre, would be laughable if it were not so serious. That money would be far better spent on fixing potholes, buying library books, or on maintaining the city's beautiful open parks and gardens than sending it offshore to Bolivia, Nigeria or Russia to buy carbon credits courtesy of some non-existent carbon sink. Now we find out from Senate estimates on Monday that Coolum Shire and Griffith City councils are also in Labor's carbon tax crosshairs. There are 112 councils in total in Labor's sites, 79% of which are in regional Australia. There are 8 the Clean Energy Regulator wrote to last month, and they included in the initial list of 248 entities to pay the tax. There are also another 104 councils which may be liable to pay the tax. While the government has given councils a 12-month reprieve and is assisting them to determine how much methane over 40 to 60 years is likely to be emitted from waste decomposition, it cannot give them any advice as to what the price of those emissions might be in 33 years' time. The government doesn't even know what the price will be in 3 years' time. The key thing here is that you only get to charge for waste disposal once when it is dropped off, but the liability will be with you for 40 to 60 years. As the May 7 editorial in the Wagga Wagga newspaper, the Daily Advertiser, declared, Wagga City Council is being forced to pay $23 per tonne carbon tax. What a load of rot. This climate change nonsense is now totally out of control. Really, there is no need for this tax. For heaven's sake, just what is the federal government thinking? Well written. This government has also wasted money on the tangle and bureaucracy which surrounds the set-top box program. Almost a quarter of the $308 million to put set-top boxes in pensioners' homes was spent on administration. The cost to the government of having a set-top box installed is about $350 per box. Harvey Norman in Wagga Wagga can do this for $99. It could install 3 boxes for less than the cost of one of the government's boxes. Disturbingly, the government also appears to be being charged for work which is not completed by contractors. I have a constituent who recently had a set-top box installed at his home by 2 contractors. On completing the installation, they laid out equipment which they claimed was a safety check and then had him sign a job form. At the time, his wife was gravely ill and he was in the process of taking her to the hospital, so he didn't pay too much attention to what he was signing. He informed me the contractors laid out an aerial and cable and took photos of these, and he is concerned the government is being rorted by contractors who are charging for services and equipment which have never been done nor installed. My constituent was also concerned about the way in which the ease of installation and explanation is portrayed in the television advertisements, yet when he asked to be shown how to use the new system, he was told, "You'll work it out." Where is the accountability for these services being rendered? What safeguards are in place to ensure taxpayers are paying only for what is actually being carried out? Furthermore, my constituent felt too scared for me to name him in this speech for fear of having a brick thrown through his window, and he believes that many elderly people feel they have no choice but to sign the forms no matter what they say, as the contractors make them feel intimidated, and if they don't sign they will take the set-top box away. However, it is not only the set-top box program which has been problematic for people in the Riverina with the digital switchover. Many residents currently receive a perfect analogue signal, yet once the switchover takes place will be left with a bad or no digital reception. One constituent, Mari Chilton from Book, is having a great deal of difficulty sorting out television for the digital switchover. She had a contractor come to install a set-top box to be advised that she had no signal whatsoever and would have to get a satellite. As there is no assistance for the purchase of a satellite, Mrs Chilton is going to have to face this cost herself. Additionally, she rents a property and therefore cannot claim the tax back homeowners can get, and her landlord refuses to pay to install the satellite. I've written to the Minister for Broadband Communications and Digital Economy on Mrs Chilton's behalf and was advised by his staff that she and I reiterate, may qualify for assistance with the installation of the satellite, but will have to cover the cost of the dish herself. Mrs Chilton does not understand why the government would spend all this money switching over when she currently receives all the channels perfectly via analogue, and yet is facing so many hassles to switch to digital. Yet this is another example of this Labor government not considering the impact of their actions on regional Australians and senior Australians. That said, Riverina secured nearly $17.5 million in health infrastructure funding despite what was a tough federal budget the toughest federal budget in a quarter of a century. The Griffith Community Private Hospital development was allocated the $11.388 million it needed for the project, and Hilston's multipurpose service redevelopment received $6 million. I know how much this will mean for those communities which have worked so hard to ensure their submissions were successful. Having updated decent facilities in centres in the Western Riverina also eases the pressure on Wagga Wagga Base Hospital, which gained $55.1 million in last year's budget as the major health facility in our region. I acknowledge the local health funding. However, the budget was not otherwise friendly for regional Australia. Labor has stripped $5.5 billion from defence, which, considering Wagga Wagga is a tri-service city, is sure to have a drastic impact. The cuts ensure that as a percentage of gross domestic product, spending on defence is now at its lowest level since 1938, the year before World War II began. 20 Army major capital facilities projects have been delayed by up to 3 years, including the construction of Kapuka's working accommodation. There is the removal of recreational leave travel for single members over the age of 21. They were entitled to go back to their next of kin once or twice a year, but that has now been cut. They cannot travel back to see their next of kin because Labor cannot stop spending. The gap year program for Air Force, Army and Navy to give young people leaving Year 12 the opportunity to go into the military for 12 months has been axed. There is a 10% reduction in Army Reserve training salaries, so 10% of our Army Reserve is being cut. What will that do to our regional communities, to our men and women who do so much to help serve the nation? Labor has badly let down the disability sector, giving just $1 billion over 4 years to start the National Disability Insurance Scheme, when the Productivity Commission said $3.9 billion was needed. And whilst Labor members might say that Labor is doing everything it can and that the coalition is doing nothing, the National Disability Insurance Scheme does have bipartisan support. I was the first federal parliamentarian in New South Wales to sign up to the program, and while the member for Kingston can complain all she likes, there is bipartisan support, and I think to go down that path of using the most vulnerable members in the community is shameful. It is absolutely shameful. These people, they absolutely need security on their funding, and they will receive it as bipartisan support.
Remain silent.
The government has deferred $941 million of vital Murray-Darling Basin infrastructure money to 2015-16. Yet money for buybacks is still very much on the table. And I just had a group of school children from St Patrick's Primary School at Griffith, and the adults accompanying those children, the one question they wanted to know was, what's this government going to do with the Murray-Darling Basin? And I have to say, Mr Deputy Speaker, I don't know. I mean, this government doesn't recognise the fact that farmers grow the food to feed this nation, and these people, they know how to use water very economically. They need the water to be able to grow the food to sustain our nation and other nations into the future. But they're being hit hard in every which way they go, and this government has not provided the sort of money it needs to for vital infrastructure money which would put environmental water back into the system. But no, this government just continues to buy water back from the productive farmers and take money away, which is nothing short of theft. Spending on roads is the lowest it's been in a decade under this budget, and that's just shameful. Aged care will cost a whole lot more thanks to this budget, which overall is a figure-fixing exercise in order to produce an illusionary budget surplus. I question Labor's claim of achieving a surplus when Labor has increased the Commonwealth borrowings limit by $50 billion to $300 billion. And that, it's like a bank overdraft. Anyone in business, anyone who's ever run a small business, knows that you should not spend beyond your capacity to pay your debts back. But unfortunately, not many on the Labor side, Mr Deputy Speaker, have actually ever run a business. They've never known how they actually need to make money to be able to pay their debts, because a lot of them are just, unfortunately, people straight from the unions, union hacks, and they have no idea about how to run a business, and therefore they've got no idea as to how to end up with a black line on the bottom of their profit and loss statement, unfortunately, and that shows because all we ever seem to get is a red line on the bottom of Labor's budgets. There is no business acumen by this reckless and wasteful Labor government, and unfortunately, I'm afraid to say that this budget has badly let down regional Australia. It's badly let down Australia as a whole, and unfortunately our defence and our security will be the poorer because of this budget. Small business will be, and families certainly will be, because of the impending carbon tax, which is only a little more than a month away, and that's going to have a very harmful effect on people's ability to meet the high cost of living pressures into the future. Thank you,
I thank
Mr.
the honourable
Deputy Speaker.
member for his contribution.